Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital Today channel. Michael Corinthos finally took the stand and told Ada Turner everything he saw on the night Drew Cain's life was forever changed, and then backed it up with testimony so detailed, so emotionally raw, and so devastatingly precise that the entire courtroom, and Port Charles itself, was left reeling. For weeks, fans have waited for the truth behind Drew's fateful night to come into focus, and when Michael opened his mouth under oath, it was clear this was no longer just about justice for Drew, but about guilt, loyalty, betrayal, and the heavy burden of silence that Michael has carried far too long. From the moment Ada Turner called Michael as her key witness, the air in the courtroom shifted. Carly stiffened in her seat, Sonny's jaw tightened, Willow looked like she might faint, and Drew, still recovering in every sense of the word, locked eyes with the man who was finally ready to speak. Michael didn't just testify. He confessed to what he saw, what he feared, and why he stayed quiet, laying out the entire timeline of that night in chilling detail, starting with the uneasy feeling that something was wrong long before violence ever entered the picture. Michael explained that he had gone to the Courtroom property that night with no intention of getting involved in anything dangerous. He was there because of family tension, unresolved business, and the lingering emotional fallout surrounding Drew. But as the night unfolded, he noticed unfamiliar movements, a car parked where it didn't belong, and voices that didn't sound like they were meant to be heard. According to Michael, the atmosphere was tense, charged, and ominous, like the calm before a storm, and he admitted that he ignored his instincts at first, believing that Drew, strong, capable, and seasoned, could handle whatever was brewing. That assumption, Michael said through visible emotion, is something he will regret for the rest of his life. As Ada Turner guided him through the sequence of events, Michael revealed that he saw a confrontation unfold from a distance, one that escalated faster than he could process, and while he didn't initially recognize every face involved, he knew instantly that Drew was in danger. Michael testified that he saw someone approach Drew with clear hostility, heard raised voices, and then witnessed the moment when everything went terribly wrong, a moment that still haunts him in his sleep. The courtroom fell silent as Michael described the chaos of those seconds, the sudden movement, the fear in Drew's eyes, and the realization that this wasn't just another heated argument in Port Charles, but a life-or-death situation. Ada Turner pressed Michael on why he didn't intervene sooner or call for help immediately, and his answer was painfully honest. He froze, paralyzed by shock, fear, and the crushing weight of knowing that whoever was behind this wasn't acting alone. Michael admitted that he believed powerful forces were at play, forces that could destroy lives far beyond Drew's if exposed too quickly, and that belief led him to make the worst decision of his life, to stay silent. When Ada Turner asked Michael to identify exactly what he saw after the attack, he took a deep breath and told the court that he watched as the assailant fled, noticed details about their movements, clothing, and direction of escape, and later realized that those details matched evidence that had surfaced during the investigation, evidence he could have corroborated much earlier if he had spoken up. Michael explained that guilt consumed him every day Drew lay in recovery, every day the case stalled, and every day innocent people fell under suspicion while the truth remained buried. The emotional toll of this silence became painfully clear when Ada Turner asked Michael how it affected his family, and his voice cracked as he spoke about Carly's worry, Willow's confusion, and Sonny's unspoken disappointment, admitting that he felt like he was betraying everyone he loved by protecting a secret that never should have been kept. In a stunning moment, Michael also revealed that he had been approached indirectly after the incident, subtle warnings, veiled threats, and reminders that some things are better left alone, which confirmed his fears that the attack on Drew was part of something much larger and more dangerous than anyone initially realized. Ada Turner seized on this revelation, arguing that Michael's testimony proved premeditation, coordination, and intent, effectively dismantling the defense's narrative that Drew's attack was a random or impulsive act. When the defense attempted to undermine Michael's credibility by questioning his delayed testimony and emotional involvement, Michael didn't flinch. Instead, he owned his mistakes, stating clearly that his silence was wrong, but that the truth he was telling now was absolute, and that he was prepared to face whatever consequences came with finally doing the right thing. The courtroom erupted in murmurs when Ada Turner presented corroborating evidence that aligned perfectly with Michael's account, security footage timestamps, phone location data, and witness statements that suddenly made sense in light of Michael's testimony, turning what had once been a murky case into a sharply defined narrative of guilt and responsibility. Drew, visibly overwhelmed, struggled to maintain composure as Michael apologized directly to him on the stand, saying that while he couldn't change what happened, he was determined to make sure the truth was no longer hidden, no matter who it hurt. That apology hit harder than any legal argument, underscoring the personal cost of the night in question and the long road to healing that still lies ahead. ADA Turner concluded her examination by emphasizing that Michael's testimony wasn't just about identifying what happened, but about exposing the chain of decisions and deceptions that allowed it to happen at all, framing the case as a cautionary tale about the dangers of power, silence, and misplaced loyalty. As Michael stepped down from the stand, the emotional shockwaves rippled through the courtroom. Carly fought back tears, Willow looked shaken to her core, Sonny stared straight ahead with an expression that suggested both pride and regret, and Drew closed his eyes as if finally allowing himself to process the full truth of that night. Outside the courtroom, the fallout was immediate and intense, with alliances shifting, old wounds reopening, and new questions emerging about who else knew what Michael knew and chose to stay silent. Fans were left breathless by the sheer weight of Michael's confession, praising the episode for its layered writing, powerhouse performances, and willingness to confront the moral gray areas that define General Hospital at its best. This wasn't just a plot twist, it was a turning point that redefined Michael's character, reframed Drew's journey, and set the stage for explosive consequences that will ripple through Port Charles for months to come. With ADA Turner now armed with the truth and the evidence to support it, the case against those responsible for Drew's fateful night has never been stronger, and as the court adjourned, one thing was clear: secrets may survive in Port Charles for a time, but when they finally come to light, they do so with unstoppable force. OMG indeed, Michael's testimony didn't just change the case, it changed everything. Picking up in the aftermath of Michael Corinthos's explosive testimony, General Hospital doubled down on the emotional and narrative fallout, stretching the consequences of that courtroom confession far beyond a single day of trial and into the very fabric of Port Charles itself. What made Michael's decision to tell ADA Turner everything he saw on Drew's fateful night so powerful wasn't just the facts he revealed, but the way those facts began to recontextualize months of storylines, exposing lies, half-truths, and morally compromised choices made by nearly everyone in Drew's orbit. As word of Michael's testimony spread through the courthouse halls and out into the city, characters were forced to confront not only what happened to Drew, but who they had become while that truth was buried. Inside the courtroom, the judge ordered a brief recess after Michael stepped down, but the pause only intensified the drama. Lawyers huddled, reporters buzzed, and the gallery hummed with speculation. ADA Turner, however, remained strikingly calm, her confidence unmistakable. Michael's testimony had given her exactly what she needed, a human eyewitness account that aligned seamlessly with the circumstantial evidence she'd been assembling piece by piece. For Turner, this was the moment when theory became reality, when suspicion crystallized into a narrative a jury could believe. She understood that juries don't just convict on facts, they convict on stories that feel true. And Michael had just given her the emotional core of that story. Drew, meanwhile, sat motionless at the plaintiff's table, visibly shaken in a way viewers rarely see. For weeks, Drew had been struggling not only with physical recovery, but with fragmented memories, unanswered questions, and the gnawing sense that someone close to him knew more than they were saying. Michael's testimony confirmed that fear in the most painful way possible. It wasn't just that Michael had seen something, it was that he had carried that knowledge alone, watching Drew suffer while the truth remained locked inside him. The betrayal cut deep, yet it was complicated by Michael's sincerity and remorse. Drew wasn't dealing with a villain, he was dealing with a broken young man who made a catastrophic choice out of fear. That complexity was reflected beautifully when court resumed and the defense began its cross-examination. Attempting to paint Michael as unreliable, emotionally compromised, and motivated by guilt rather than truth, the defense attorney pushed hard, suggesting that Michael's memory of events had been influenced by time, trauma, and outside conversations. But Michael stood firm. He didn't claim perfection, he admitted fear clouded his judgment, that shock slowed his reaction, but he never wavered on what he saw. In fact, his willingness to acknowledge his flaws only strengthened his credibility. This wasn't a rehearsed performance, it was a reckoning. The most jaw-dropping moment came when the defense implied that Michael's silence benefited him personally, hinting at business interests, family alliances, and the Corinthos legacy of secrecy. Instead of deflecting, Michael agreed, yes, his silence did protect him in some ways. And that, he said plainly, was exactly why he hated himself for it. That admission stunned the courtroom. In a genre often driven by denial and deflection, Michael's self-indictment felt raw, honest, and devastating. Ada Turner seized the moment on redirect, framing Michael's testimony not as self-serving, but as an act of delayed courage, one that came at great personal cost. Outside the courthouse, the ripple effects were just as dramatic. Carly was confronted by multiple characters demanding to know whether she suspected Michael had been hiding something all along. Her reaction, equal parts defensive, heartbroken, and fiercely maternal, highlighted the impossible position she was in, torn between her instinct to protect her son and her loyalty to Drew, a man who had suffered enormously. Carly's emotional breakdown later that evening, alone in the Metro court, underscored the generational weight of secrets in the Corinthos family. She realized with painful clarity that Michael hadn't just inherited Sonny's strength, he'd inherited his tendency to believe silence equals protection. Willow's reaction was quieter, but perhaps even more devastating. Watching Michael testify forced her to confront the emotional distance she'd felt growing between them for months. Suddenly, it made sense, the sleepless nights, the sudden mood swings, the haunted look in his eyes. Yet understanding didn't erase the hurt. In a private scene later, Willow questioned whether Michael trusted her at all, or whether he had decided, like so many before him, that bearing the burden alone was somehow noble. The tension between them added another layer to the fallout, suggesting that while truth can free you legally, it can fracture you emotionally. Sonny Corinthos' response was perhaps the most chilling. He said very little, but his silence spoke volumes. Sonny recognized Michael's choice instantly, not as weakness, but as a familiar strategy born from living in a world where knowledge is power and power invites danger. For Sonny, Michael's testimony was both a point of pride and a warning sign. Pride, because his son ultimately chose truth over fear. Fear, because that truth now threatened to expose networks, alliances, and histories Sonny had spent decades managing. The question looming over Port Charles became unavoidable: who else might fall once the truth about Drew's attack fully unravels? Back in court, Ada Turner capitalized on that tension, calling additional witnesses whose statements suddenly carried new weight in light of Michael's testimony. Small inconsistencies that once seemed insignificant now appeared damning. Timelines tightened. Motives sharpened. Even the defense's strongest arguments began to crumble under the combined pressure of evidence and emotion. What had once been a case built on speculation transformed into a cohesive narrative of planning, opportunity, and intent. Michael hadn't just filled in gaps, he had connected the dots. The episode's brilliance lay in how it treated truth not as a clean resolution, but as a catalyst for chaos. Michael's confession didn't neatly close the chapter on Drew's fateful night, it blew the chapter wide open, revealing subplots and moral dilemmas that will fuel General Hospital for months. Who issued the warnings Michael received? Who benefited most from Drew being silenced? And perhaps most importantly, how many people convinced themselves they were protecting loved ones when they were really protecting themselves? As the trial adjourned for the day, Ada Turner stood alone in the courtroom, gathering her files with a look of grim satisfaction. She knew the hardest part was still ahead, convincing a jury, navigating political pressure, and withstanding inevitable backlash, but she also knew something had shifted permanently. The truth had a voice now, and that voice belonged to Michael Corinthos. In the final moments of the episode, Michael stood outside the courthouse, staring at the city skyline, the weight of his testimony settling in. He hadn't just told Ada Turner what he saw on Drew's fateful night, he had publicly acknowledged his own failure, shattered the illusion of safety built on silence, and stepped into a future where consequences are unavoidable. For better or worse, there was no going back. OMG indeed. Michael's courtroom revelation didn't just redefine the case against Drew's attacker, it redefined loyalty, courage, and accountability in Port Charles. And as General Hospital fans know all too well, when the truth finally comes out, it never arrives alone. As the story continued to unfold in the episodes that followed, General Hospital leaned fully into the psychological aftermath of Michael Corinthos's testimony, exploring not just what he revealed in court, but what it cost him to finally speak. The truth, once unleashed, proved impossible to contain, spreading through Port Charles like a slow-burning fire that touched every corner of Michael's life. What made this arc so compelling was its refusal to present truth as a simple act of heroism. Instead, it showed truth as something sharp and dangerous, capable of cutting both the guilty and the innocent. In the days after his testimony, Michael found himself isolated in ways he hadn't anticipated. Friends avoided him, not out of anger, but uncertainty. They didn't know whether to treat him as a whistleblower, a victim, or a man who waited too long to do the right thing. That ambiguity weighed heavily on him. Scenes of Michael alone in his office at Aurora or wandering the Courtroom grounds late at night emphasized how deeply the silence he once chose had become part of him. Even now, after telling everything to Ada Turner, he couldn't simply shed the guilt. If anything, it felt sharper, now that it had been spoken aloud. Drew's journey, meanwhile, took on a new emotional dimension. Knowing what happened to him was one thing, knowing that someone he trusted had witnessed it and stayed silent was another entirely. Drew struggled with anger he didn't want to feel and compassion he couldn't quite suppress. In a powerful confrontation between Drew and Michael, Drew admitted that part of him was grateful that the truth was finally out, grateful that justice might finally be possible. But another part of him felt robbed of choice. If Michael had spoken sooner, Drew wondered aloud, would the healing have come easier? Would the nightmares have faded faster? That question lingered between them, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. Ada Turner's role grew increasingly complex as well. While she remained focused on the legal case, it became clear she understood the human cost of what she was asking of Michael. In a quiet moment in her office, she told him bluntly that juries forgive fear more easily than they forgive deception, but that forgiveness isn't guaranteed. Her warning wasn't cruel, it was realistic. Turner knew that the defense would continue to exploit Michael's delayed testimony, and she prepared him for the possibility that the truth might not bring the absolution he hoped for. Still, she reminded him that silence would have guaranteed injustice, and in that sense, he had already changed the outcome. The broader community reaction added another layer of tension. Port Charles is a town built on long memories, and once Michael's testimony became public knowledge, everyone had an opinion. Some praised his courage, others questioned his integrity. Rumors spread that he was protecting someone powerful, or that he had been coerced into speaking now for strategic reasons. This climate of suspicion reflected one of General Hospital's oldest themes: in a town where everyone has secrets, the act of telling the truth can make you more vulnerable than keeping quiet. Willow, caught between public scrutiny and private heartbreak, faced her own reckoning. She wanted to support Michael, but she also had to confront the reality that he didn't let her share his burden when it mattered most. Their conversations became slower, heavier, filled with pauses and unspoken fears. Willow worried that Michael's instinct to shield others by sacrificing himself emotionally would eventually tear them apart. Her concern wasn't about the past, it was about the future. If another crisis came, would he choose silence again? Sonny's shadow loomed large over all of it. Though not directly on trial, Sonny understood better than anyone how quickly legal truths can turn into existential threats. Michael's testimony signaled a generational shift, one that Sonny couldn't fully control. He had taught his children many lessons, intentionally and unintentionally, and now he was forced to watch Michael navigate the consequences of choosing a different path. Sonny's rare moments of introspection revealed a man wrestling with pride and fear in equal measure, aware that Michael's stand might ultimately dismantle the very systems Sonny once believed kept his family safe. As the trial pushed forward, new revelations hinted that Michael's testimony was only the beginning. Additional evidence surfaced, suggesting that the attack on Drew involved more planning and more players than initially believed. Suddenly, Michael's earlier fear, that powerful people were involved, no longer seemed paranoid. It seemed prophetic. The tension shifted from what happened to who else knew, and that question threatened to implicate characters across multiple storylines. Each revelation reinforced the idea that Drew's fateful night wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger web of ambition, resentment, and calculation.